want to respect everybody's time. I do have a babysitter here if anybody needs to be babysat. And that way, there'll be a room during the meeting, should you need to excuse yourself. Go in the back there. There are sweet treats in the back. This shameless plug from my store, J-Town Deli. So a few incidentals. The restrooms are in the back to the left. And if you could do me a favor, I know Mr. Stokey, who helped set up the meeting tonight with the chairs and everything, if you could just, when you're done, just leave your chairs where they are, that would be lovely. I know it's counterintuitive to your mother telling you to pick up after yourself, but just leave your chair where it is. That would make him happy, so thank you for doing that. And then the fire exits, should we have an issue, over here and over here would be my best guess, because it would be coming from there. So, just carry on, all right? So, just to refresh your memory, back in March, the community voted on this committee, a facilities type committee, to take a look at what the community needs are and what facilities we do have. So Barbara Campbell and myself have been co-chairing the committee meetings. We've had one every month now. We have a great committee. There's about ranging from 10 to 12 or 16 of us at any given meeting. They are open. You're welcome to join. When we post the minutes, which are on the town website, as well as go out on e-news, the date for the next meeting is in those minutes. So should you want to find out what that is, we would love to have the more the merrier. So you're welcome to come. So the premise of the committee is to review the facilities that we do have in Jackson, as well as look at what are we looking at as a community in 10 to 20 years. What are our expectations? What might we need in that time? And then my personal view is that we have so many well-traveled and educated people in this community. You know, what do you want in your community? What are we missing? What are we thinking of? What will we need in the future? So we have Stacy Dahl from North Country Community Council, or something like that, is here, and this is her area of expertise, is to look at communities like ours and forecast out what our needs are going to be. So she's going to spend some time going over what that might be. And then we have Jen Premble, who did a community overview. There she is, thank you. A community overview of what we have in the community. So she's going to review quickly an educational document that will be online, as well as copies will be at the town hall if you don't want to go online. But it's really a tool for you to review at your leisure. But we have put she's put a lot of work into this to say, like, what do we have? What buildings do we have? Who owns them? Those types of things. So what pieces of land do we have? So it's worth it to take a look at that as well. And then this all leads up to the great survey, which you'll be getting in November. It will be online, in your mailbox. It'll be all over the place. So we prefer you to do it online. So we'll be looking at emails, hopefully, to send out to you so you can do it online so our data collection is easier. That's really what the case would be. And we're really looking for open-ended questions, like what services do you want in the community? What do you foresee needing in the community? So that's what we're really looking for. And then once we have those things, then we can hand it off at the end of the year back to the selectmen in March to say, this is what our community needs or wants. So that's what we're really looking to do here. We're not doing a capital campaign. We're not raising any money. We're just getting your open-ended opinions on what you would like to see in our community. And we don't have a lot of time for open questions. We are going to have more listening posts as we move on. But that's really the overlay of tonight's meeting. We're trying to keep it to an hour. I really appreciate you all coming out. This is fabulous turnout. I'm very excited, so thank you. And there's more treats in the back. And did I miss anything?
One other thing I do want to say is that all of the meetings are being filmed by Hank Benish in the back. So on Jackson Flicks, you can see every past meeting that we've had. This is live streaming tonight.
So everybody wave, because everybody wants to watch it.
But all the meetings will be posted. There are minutes that are on the town website as well. So please always spread the word. Watch these, ask questions. If you don't wait till the next meeting. If you have questions or thoughts, throw them at either Jen or me or the committee, or show up at the meetings. We really want this participation of the whole town, whether you be just a part-time resident, taxpayer, full-time resident. We want everyone's buy-in on this.
All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Dahl. And can I really quickly, my friend over here asked if he can have 1 minute with everyone here in the room, and I told him he could take a minute from my presentation about the checklist.
I'll try to do
Oh, great, yes.
I'm one of the supervisors of the checklist, and we're trying to track down 7 voters who are in the following situation. If you came and voted in the primary and you showed up as a registered Republican or a registered Democrat and voted, and then if you're one of the 7 people who filled out a form to change their party affiliation back to change their party affiliation to undeclared, well, we found out that night that that's against state law. So we need to talk to those 7 people. So if you're one of them, could you please come talk to me sometime tonight? Thanks.
I thought that was worth taking some time for. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Stacy Dahl, and I am the Community Resiliency Planner at North Country Council Regional Planning Commission. And I'll talk a little bit about who we are to start with. But I'm really happy to be here. I think probably my first conversation that connects me to Jackson in this conversation around resiliency was Emily Benson and I talked about a 1.5 years ago when I came back to North Country Council to do this plan that I'm going to talk to you about this evening. And she said, you know, this timing is kind of interesting because we're talking about facilities in Jackson and talking about what does resiliency look like at a community level as we see folks that have decided to stay here for a while and make this their home and new folks that are making this their home. How do we talk about resiliency in our community? We spoke again after March town meeting and we heard that the community facilities group was forming. She said, I'm sure at some point we're going to invite you to Jackson to talk about what you've learned in the region. And then Janice called me to make that invitation happen. So here I am. Thank you so much. It's great to see so many people come out. There's a lot of places you can be tonight, but you chose to be here in the community, which I think says a lot. Just to start, to give you kind of an overview of who we are and what we do, North Country Council is both a regional planning commission and an economic development district, which means we do planning work for 50 communities. You can see here on the map in New Hampshire, the darker yellow from Pittsburgh all the way down to Plymouth is our area. We help communities in all of Coos County, northern Grafton, and northern Carroll County. But our economic development district includes all of Grafton County, so we have a few more communities that we work with. And when we're doing economic development planning, that means that funding is coming out of the Economic Development Administration. We're typically talking to businesses and industry, okay? So a lot of the work that we've done over the last 2 years around resiliency has been with businesses and industry. But it's interesting what they said because I think some of the strategies that came out of this plan actually dovetail more into communities. So we'll talk about that this evening. And really our role is to work with local governments to do land use planning, transportation planning, environmental planning, and in this case, economic development planning. During the pandemic, the Economic Development Administration had funding under the CARES Act to look at regions and try to understand what was happening to the economy. Where were the greatest challenges? How did business and industry pivot? How did people come together? What really wasn't working? And what we found out in the North Country, which isn't too much of a surprise, is that we had a lot of already underlying challenges as a rural region that were just exacerbated by the pandemic. So yes, we saw some new challenges, but it really just highlighted the challenges that we already knew that were true. Now, a little background on me. I worked at the Regional Planning Commission for about 8 years back in 2000, left in 2008. I've been doing environmental planning and permaculture work. I'm really a tree hugger type of person. Pandemic hits, and all 4 of my part-time jobs stopped. And my husband, who works at Northern Vermont University, they were threatening to close the school. And a very well-established middle-class family was about to lose their home.
So I reached out to the planning commission and I said, Michelle, do you have any work? And she goes, oh, thank you, I'm so glad you called. I have economic development work. And I went, I'm a tree hugger. What does a tree hugger do with economic development work? But what we decided to do was kind of marry my philosophy of looking at everything as an ecosystem and the idea that we have a strong rural economy, and marry those two ideas to come up with a planning process that was very inclusive. We talked to everybody, and we tried as best we could to be out in the community, even though it was 2020, and we were all spending a lot of time on Zoom. So the idea was, what are some of the activities that we were seeing happening around the region that were working, and what were some of the things that we needed to wrestle with moving forward? And we came up with this sort of vision statement for the work that we were going to do. And it's to develop strategies and solutions for a more resilient, inclusive, and caring economy. Not something we had said in the past, but I wanted to make sure that that was part of it. That could withstand, adapt, innovate, and transform in the face of both human and natural disasters. So the planning process looked like this. First of all, we knew that it was going to be very hard to meet in person, so we utilized Zoom to hold a series of focus groups. And again, this funding was coming from the Economic Development Administration, so they wanted to know that we were meeting with business and industry to see how they were impacted. So we had focus groups with food and agriculture, arts and culture, small businesses, nurses, teachers. I wanted to talk to the people that we were calling essential in our economy and ask them how they were being impacted, what was working and what wasn't. There was also this reality that not everyone had the time or the capacity or even the energy to show up on Zoom and have this conversation. So I stand before you today saying not everybody's voices were heard, and this work continues. Even though the grant is coming to a conclusion, we found additional funding to keep me on part-time. That door is always open. If there's something in our plan that does not reflect the situation that you know of, we need to hear those stories. We need to adjust the plan, okay? Because it was very real for me that people said, Stacy, this is really important, but I can't come today. I've had 5 other Zoom meetings. I'm trying to run a business with half my employees. I'm really tired. I get it. So we did as best we could. We had probably over 200 participants in those focus groups. And what happened was, very much like in this sort of setting where people said, oh, do you know, did you talk to so-and-so? And so-and-so, did you talk to so-and-so? And so I started picking up the phone and just randomly calling and having these sort of really impromptu interviews with folks around the region. Again, this is from Pittsburgh all the way down to Hanover, so it's about a third to a half of the state of New Hampshire, and just collecting stories, talking to people about how they were impacted. And we heard some common things that kept coming up over and over again. The first was that we might not have the financial capital in our region to deal with things in the most challenging of times. But we have the social, the cultural, and the natural capital that makes this region rich. And it was the social capital that we utilized the most when things were challenging. We knew who to call, how to get something, who to put people in touch with. It was obvious to me, because I was running all over the place calling people on the phone, that that's an abundant resource in our region. The other is our Yankee ingenuity, that we weren't afraid to try new things. We weren't afraid to roll up our sleeves in challenging times, because guess what? The North Country has had to survive other challenging times, especially the North Country economy. So there were some positive things that were kind of highlighted during the pandemic, but the common needs and the things that we heard, and some of these might ring true in Jackson as well, is supporting the basic needs of everyone. Now here I was from the Economic Development Administration's funding, talking to businesses about what do you need to retain and grow jobs, and they're saying to me, housing, childcare, health. And I'm going, okay, this is at the heart of community, and now it's at the heart of business. They saw that as the most important thing that we needed to address, not to help them figure out what was going on within their business. They had that. But they wanted to make sure that we as a region were helping them take care of their employees and their families. Fair livable wages, I think we've all heard that, especially with housing prices going up. Holistic cross-sector design of solutions. So the problems that we're seeing are complex, the solutions need to be complex too. Dealing with things in individual silos, not gonna work moving forward. Okay, so if we were to consider a new housing project, does that housing include childcare and food and health? Or are all those things separate and therefore maybe bumping up against each other for the same funding? Okay, so tearing down the silos, and then there are those kind of big bucket items: affordable housing for local residents, childcare, reliable broadband across the region. These were the things that were kind of common across all those focus group conversations. I also had the great fortune of having an intern come into the office, well actually our virtual office, during 2020 and 2021, because what was coming out of the focus groups was, well, you know what's really cool? I heard they did X, Y, and Z in Colorado, or there's a really great model down in Connecticut. I don't know that if we've done this in New Hampshire, but Vermont's done X, Y, and Z. So whenever a focus group, an industry or a business would say, what else exists out there, we would put together these case study reports, and our intern did a beautiful job in making them readable, beautiful documents, QR codes in them, so you can take your phone and it'll take you right to the website. All of these exist on our website, so they're open to anyone who wants to review them. And I'll make sure that you have that website at the end of the presentation. The most fun for me was going out and gathering the stories of resiliency. So as soon as it was safe to do so, we spent a lot of time mostly outside, farmers markets, arts and cultural events. There were a few communities that said, come on in, we'll set up interviews in our town. You can talk to folks, come into a building like this and talk to folks about what they're experiencing. And so we went out and we gathered these stories of resiliency, and our outreach coordinator just so happens to be a film student. So I said, bring your camera. And for the first time, we interviewed people and caught it on film, and we made these little short videos that are on our website of people's words telling us what they were experiencing and how they were coming together. So everything that is in the plan document, I feel like, I say probably 90% of the words are not mine, they're just me organizing other people's words. It was very important that the story of how this region recovers and bounces back and how do we plan for the future came from the people in the region, not just me. So what I want to highlight, and then I want to talk about how these sort of common themes might come in touch at a community level. Things that you can be thinking about as a community facilities committee, but also as a community in general, moving forward. 7 common themes. So it didn't matter which sector of the economy, these were the things that kept coming up over and over again that I think we need to invest in, both financially, but also with our energy and our time. And I think that there's some really, again, some nuggets in here that we can learn from that probably apply here at the community level as well. The first being collaboration and collective impact. I remember our first Zoom meeting with the arts and culture community, and everyone was sharing what was going on. You know, almost all, if not all, of our arts and culture facilities were shut down. A lot of the events that we used to have in 2020 stopped. Had to figure out how to rebound. We were talking about what happened to all the performers. Like, did they move? Did they find other jobs? What happened to the industry? And at the very end of the meeting, a guy that I know in Littleton named Jason, he goes, hey Stacy, before you shut the meeting, can we just sit here on Zoom for a minute? I want to see everyone who's here. I haven't seen anybody. How have you guys been? And then he thanked me, and he said, thank you for bringing us all together, because if it weren't for somebody taking the time, like this evening, to bring us all together, no matter how important we know collaboration is, we're all busy day to day and we might not do it. So what we kept hearing over and over again is maybe it's a role for North Country Council and other organizations to play, but we need to create some structure around collaboration. In this region in particular, when there's funding available for facilities, for infrastructure projects, to think about the big picture in the region, if every community and every organization, everyone is fighting for the same dollars, like we're too small to compete with each other. But when we come together and we have a collective voice, and we say this is what our region needs, now when the federal government says, well, there's a $2 million grant, we can say the North Country needs $2 million, and here's the collective group that says that we need it and what for. So we really see that as an important piece going forward. And I'll talk at the end about how we're already starting to do that with the food and agriculture community, and I'm really excited about that work. The other is, how do we measure? I talked about social capital earlier. How do we measure collective impact? Because one of the things that always comes out of getting grant funding or getting support to do work is, what are your metrics? How do you measure this project and its success? I'm here to tell you that the measurement for economic development is growing and retaining jobs. End of list. And yet I'm talking to businesses who are going, no, it's housing, it's childcare, it's our environment, it's this, this, and that. So we need to come up with a method in our region that we can measure that when we do come together and collaborate, how we have greater impact than when we do it alone. So this was the first kind of area that we heard consensus pretty much across different sectors, but we need to put more effort into supporting this moving forward. We also, shocker, I know this is happening right now in this community, we have to do additional planning and assessment. What's interesting is that the funding that supported us doing the planning for this, right on the heels of it was, and now there's implementation dollars. We went, hold on. All we've done is identified where we need to do more planning and assessment. I can't tell you what's the best infrastructure projects for trails in the North Country. We haven't inventoried the trails that we have. We're a very small region by the number of people, so it's going to take some time. What I would like is to see planning and assessment dollars come in so we can assess our trails, and I can tell you whether they're adequately maintained, if there's adequate parking, yada, yada, yada. And then I can tell you what we need for infrastructure. So there was a list of things, and in the plan, again, you'll have links so that you can, I'm not going to read you the whole 75-page plan at 7 o'clock at night. That's brutal to do to anybody. But in there is a list of different plans and inventories that we as a region need to do. So that when there's infrastructure dollars, we can actually go after that. I think this is a critical piece right now for Jackson to think about, and this is why you have this great community facilities group, is to say, how do we inventory what we have? What is the assessment of that inventory? What's working, what's not? So compare that to the community survey, and then plan from there what you need. So that you're not saying, well, we need it all, but what's the timeline? What's most important? What is the community saying that they need to invest in first? The last piece, and I'll say this again on our seventh common theme, is this last little piece down here about climate resiliency. I asked the question in every one of our economic sectors, let's define resiliency for your industry. And the question I said is, what else should we be thinking about? We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Did you think that this was going to be what crippled our economy? And every industry said no. I thought it would be climate change. And yet, when we moved on to strategies, we went right back to focusing on the pandemic. Rightfully so, right? We're still living in it. I'm here to say Mother Nature's not going to wait for us to fully recover from the pandemic before we see more droughts in our summers and warmer winters. So we've been able to talk with some of the folks that work for the Appalachian Mountain Club, Mount Washington Observatory, and talk to them about some of the research they've done. We're like, how does that information dovetail into the planning and assessment work that's going to be happening in all of our communities and throughout our region. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end too, because there's progress being made on that front. This is the big one. You can see the bullets fill the whole screen. It was really important for me to make sure that this went into an economic development plan, that we need to invest in the backbone systems of our communities. We cannot grow and retain jobs if we are not investing and supporting necessary housing infrastructure, necessary transportation, necessary early childhood development, health for all of our residents, and food for everyone in our region. Anyone even think about food during the pandemic? Anyone challenged with food? I can tell you that our farmers were like, right? They stepped up and they struggled to meet the demand. And if the trucks stopped coming completely, we would have been in trouble. Okay, so it's important for us to recognize that we can't just support the economy without supporting this. So this is in our plan, and it's probably the largest chapter that talks about the need to support this moving forward. I would say as you're planning for a community, make sure that these kind of big ticket items that are meeting the basic needs of the folks in your community are front and center of the community facilities planning effort. Equity, connectivity, and access for all was another theme that came up. We talked about this one a lot in education because we were talking about broadband. We were saying how some students did really well at home because they had internet connection, they had the support at home, they had a parent that was able to be home with them, whatever the situation might be, they thrived. But when you really look at socioeconomics, and if there was challenges already in the family, and maybe the child didn't have internet connection, or everyone was at home working together, and so the internet went down and too many users and all, those kids struggled a lot in school. And so for us to say it's only one way of teaching moving forward is not equitable and is not fair across the region. We need to balance that. This is also recognizing that we're seeing a lot of new folks and a lot of new people moving to the region. Thank you if you are new to the region for being here. Welcome to the North Country. And how is it that you are a part of this community? There's heritage and culture and goals and life that existed here before you came, and now you're here and you're a part of it. So please contribute and be a part of that community. How are we making it accessible to everybody while still preserving what community means to those of us that are here? And in health, we talked quite a bit about the social determinants of health. Once again, circling back to socioeconomics, it wasn't just about could you get to your doctor and did you have masks and did you have PPE? It was about whether you had the resources to get that, whether you had the time if you were working 2 or 3 jobs, whether you had a car to get there. There are parts of our region that really struggled with this, so it's really important for us to think about that moving forward. Balanced economies, I think this is my 5th of 7. Balanced economies is an important one too, and here's what we mean by that. This is once again kind of bringing forward that typically when we talk about economic development, I believe the Economic Development Administration defines it as supporting communities in a region to be competitive in a global market. And the global market kind of stopped in some ways, and so we had to rely a lot more on our local market. Good thing, good thing. So we need to be able to balance moving forwards. Economic development needs to be both competitive on a national or perhaps global scale, but also investing in our local economy. Buy local, shop local, support local, eat local, buy local. All of this needs to be a part of it. We also need to make sure that when investments are coming in, that we are strengthening supply and demand equally. We had a pretty robust conversation with our outdoor recreation focus group on how that doesn't always happen, that a lot of funding goes towards marketing and getting folks to come to this beautiful region, but not the same amount of money goes into supporting maintaining. Okay, so the outdoor recreation industry was strained, and some of you may know that they were strained during the pandemic. Could not keep up with demand. And some communities down in Woodstock, they shut down local trails because they were being misused. And the town just, they did not have the capacity to deal with that. So we've been a pretty loud vocal voice. We've told the state a few times as outdoor recreation funding comes in, can we make sure we have just as much money to support the industry that supports the tourists coming here? Guys, it needs to be balanced. And then balance across all forms of community capital. I'll show you a slide in just a few moments. There are 8 forms of capital, okay? And in the economy, in our traditional economic development world, we talk just about financial capital and sometimes material capital like infrastructure and things. But again, if we said here in the region that social, natural, and cultural capital is what makes this place rich and thrive, then we need to make sure that we can invest economic development dollars in that. I don't know if we can, but we're putting it in the plan saying it's important to do so. We have to balance it. Probably not a surprise that within an economic development recovery plan, you would see innovation, education, and workforce development. But what we were hearing is, and the one that I love, the example that came out of education is we need to get creative in education. Businesses are looking for workers. Our farmers are looking to pass the torch, many of them that are retiring. The arts and culture community want to see more artists, but arts are being cut from schools. So the business community is going, well, why can't the students come to us? We do internships, but what if your senior year was in the community, working in the businesses in your community, building the relationships in your community? What if we don't have a business in the community that sparks your interest as a student? Can we take you to a co-working space and match you up with an entrepreneur and teach you how to create your own business? So thinking creatively about what it means for education moving forward, and then making sure that we're investing in our existing workforce to give them the proper training that they want as well as what they need. And during this time, this was really difficult to do because we were constantly sort of reacting to what was right in front of us. I will say, this might be a great place to mention this. We probably, maybe you've heard in the news the term the Great Resignation. I actually heard from a lot of people who didn't resign. They didn't go, whoo, I'm just gonna sit on my couch and collect unemployment, see what's on Netflix today. I heard story after story of how people took their unemployment checks and invested in the business that they've always dreamed of opening. Started a new business. And I asked my good friend who lives down in Virginia, she works for employment security for the federal government, and I told her that. She goes, huh? And I go, what? She goes, well, I work in the statistics department, and we're doing a lot of how many businesses lost employees, but I don't know if we're comparing that to how many new businesses came online. And I went, well, I'm not telling you how to do your job. You're my best friend. But maybe there's something in that. So one of the things that I think is important for us in our region is to help businesses and individuals transition if they need to. Okay, I think there's a lot more people leaning in the local food movement now. I know I am. I grow half my family's food. And I told my husband, if this whole planning gig doesn't work out, I'm just going to become a little farmer. I don't mind doing that. So people are sharpening their skills and transitioning. We need to be able to support that moving forward. Last one. The seventh piece, common theme that came up in this plan is culture, climate, and quality of life. There is a certain feeling you get from living in this region that we need to be able to protect. Okay, and it might get challenged at times. I think in some respects it was challenged during the pandemic, but we also learned how to use that culture and community to come together. So So we need to make sure that we can invest and support in that in the future. And then this was another place to put that plug in. We have this rich, beautiful natural environment that we need to protect, and at the same time understand that it's shifting and changing, and how might that impact the way in which we build facilities, the way in which we talk about food and agriculture. When we're talking about electricity and running lights in buildings, at some point is that going to be so impactful that we decide we need to shift to renewables? So this conversation is a big one, and we didn't get a chance to really dive into because we were still very much facing the impacts of the pandemic, and still are today. So I want to talk a little bit about what's emerged, and then if you're like, well, that's great, I came out for a presentation on what's happening in Jackson, this woman's going to talk about our region. I do want to drill it down a little bit more into where I think you can utilize some of what we did in this planning process in the community here. So what's emerged is we worked with a consulting group out of Bethlehem called Cardinal Consulting. Nathan Carroll is the founder and principal, and he used to work for the Littleton Chamber of Commerce as the executive director. Lost his job during the pandemic, started a consulting firm. He worked with our team to interview small businesses, and there's a really great video on our website of different business owners talking about how they were impacted. And what Nathan kept asking is, well, what do you need? You know, what resources are available? If I was transitioning my business from this to that, how would I do that? If I decided I wanted to close my doors, how would I do that? If I'm thinking about starting a business. So Nathan worked with our team to lay out this business kind of resource roadmap that said no matter where you are, like pick an off-ramp, these are the people you contact, this is how you get in touch with them. And it was created with feedback from those small businesses, and then he gave it to a few small businesses and said, test it out, does it work, does it not work? And we edited it and made it work. That's available on the website for anyone to utilize. Planning for housing. Okay, I am not the housing planner at North Country Council because I know there's a lot of questions around housing. My colleague, Kayla Tavares, is working on housing on many different fronts right now in our region. She was prior to us doing the North Country Rising work, but now there's support for the Regional Planning Commission to step up and work with communities. If Jackson has some really important housing needs, please get in touch with our office and talk to Kayla. There's funding available right now. There's technical assistance we can provide and support you with. So I know this is a big one. She's working with a lot of communities, and we want to continue to help. Food and agriculture. So when I am not working at North Country Council, I am a permaculture educator and consultant. So food and agriculture is near and dear to my heart. And I'm happy to say that once the focus groups concluded, the food and ag industry came back to me and said, that's it? We're just going to have a couple of focus groups and you're going to put our thoughts in a plan. What else can we do? And I went, okay, well, let's host another meeting and see what we could do. We came up with this idea that the food and ag industry, they have a lot of ideas of what they want to do. Form a food council, do an assessment of the food system throughout the whole region, develop a training program for the next generation of farmers. They're already working with land conservation groups on can you grow and harvest food on conservation lands, and what does that mean? But from March to October, they go silent. Obviously, they're growing food. So a small group of them continued to meet with me, and this spring I said, what if we held a summit, a food and ag summit, in November when the growing season's over and before everyone goes and takes a nice holiday nap for 3 months? Can we bring them all together? And I'm happy to say that the first ever North Country Food and Agriculture Summit is happening on November 1st at the Highland Center. We announced it to the food and ag industry. We filled half the seats in less than a week. I think it's going to be full in another week or two. If there are folks in the community that are deeply tied to food and agriculture, please, please, please talk to me. If there are seats available, we'd love to have you join us. You're in the region. We want you to be part of that conversation. Okay, it's an important one for resiliency, and it's an important one for the industry. We have a lot of farmers that are retiring, and they're going, please utilize me. I'd love to teach people to do what I do before I leave and stop doing this. So that's an important one that we're helping with. I'm also happy to say, I'm going to call it Resiliency 2.0. We successfully got funding through EDA to keep my position part-time to continue this work, to continue this conversation. That's why I'm able to help the food and ag industry come together. That's why I'm able to be here tonight. Okay, it's also why I'm going to go back and have that climate resiliency conversation with anybody who wants to have that conversation. So we are going to keep working. We're not going to let the conversation end just because the first grant ended. I'm going to stay and try to help the region as much as possible with the items that we have listed in the plan. The other thing I want to say, I don't have it with me tonight, but Kayla and I have talked. Jackson is not the only community that has said, this is all great, Stacy, but what does this mean at a local level? So we want to put together a short, almost like checklist or resource guide. If you are a community considering resiliency, how do you recover from the pandemic? What other big challenges are you wrestling with, like community facilities for the next 10 to 20 years? What should you be looking for? How do you get together? What sort of questions should you be asking? So we hope to have that put together within the next month or so. I'll make sure that you have a copy of that. It'll be on the same website as everything else is. So with that, here's some food for thought. I was thinking about, what am I going to tell them from all this planning effort? What would I tell them to focus on first? If you were to integrate the idea of community resiliency, whether it's in the community facilities work or generally in any sort of planning that you do, I think it starts by defining what resiliency means for your community. We did this with the industries. I asked them, what are we even talking about? Resiliency of what? Your industry, your employees, your community? Let's talk about what it is we're talking, that's included in resiliency. Resiliency to what? We're facing a global pandemic, but what else? This is where climate came up. Natural disasters, huge changes in the workforce. Resiliency for whom? Who's not here tonight? Why aren't they here? Okay, so we need to consider everyone that's involved when we talk about resiliency. And resiliency for what? Is it just a better bottom line, better jobs, social benefits, vibrancy, sustainability of the community? I know I'm kind of going through all this quickly. I'll make sure that I get a copy of this to you so that you don't have to write all this down. Here are those 8 forms of capital that I mentioned. I think another great part of the planning process is to do a needs assessment. Assess what your assets are too, not just what you need. Start with what you have. That's always a really great, what do we have? This is a beautiful community, so what do we have? Not just financially, what do you have in individual, intellectual, social, cultural, natural, built, political, and financial capital in the town of Jackson? Might be interesting to do, and then go back and say, what do you need? Okay, because a lot of times when we get to built and we're thinking about community facilities, do you have the intellectual capital, the social capital, the connections to make some of those projects happen quicker? Do you have the political capital, if you need it, to build new facilities or to retrofit facilities in town? So this sort of assessment is really important. This is what we did for our plan. We assessed everything that we heard. We broke it down by capitals, and it was our inventory and assessment for the resiliency plan. I'm going to say it one more time. All of our planning, all of it, especially when we're talking about resiliency, has to come back to meeting the basic needs of all residents. And I know I'm keep beating on that drum, but food, water, wastewater systems, some of our communities, the infrastructure is a little dated, right? So we need to really take a look at that. Does everyone have access to food, water, shelter, heat. I'd throw heat in there. We all know heating oil prices are going to go through the roof this year. Electricity, you know, and then what does that look like 20 years down the road if those prices are going to keep going up? Do we talk about owning community facilities? I've had this conversation with Littleton Water and Light. Why don't we own a solar field? And they're like, why? We have the cheapest rates. I'm like, for now, I'm going to keep asking you that question every year until we get a solar field. So just thinking about that. And then I want to say plan integration and creation. I mentioned this to Jen and Barb at the beginning. We kind of heard when we first started working on our resiliency plan, and you might want to get ready to write community resiliency plans. And as planners, we were like, oh, good, another plan for the towns, right? You have master plans, you have zoning ordinances. Some communities, maybe you do have a hazards mitigation plan, do capital improvements plans. You might have all the plans that you need in town. The key is to go back to this stuff. How do you define resiliency? What are your assets and all? Are we meeting basic needs and integrate it into the plans that you have? I don't think that you need another plan. I think you can utilize it and work within the plan that you have. If you're doing a community infrastructure plan, thinking about your facilities, and you decide we need capital improvements, here's the list of all the things that we need to do in our community. Here's what they cost. Here's the priority. Here's the timeline. That might be a really good place to take that resiliency assessment to help you prioritize what you do first. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're doing from what I'm gathering from the community survey and from having so many people come out to be part of this conversation. Last slide's just resources for you. If you haven't heard about it, I just watched the videos, so they're still live right now. The Small Business Development Center and University of New Hampshire held in 2020, or maybe it was 2021 and 2022, a Resiliency Academy. Community leaders, planners, businesses, a whole bunch of us participated. And a lot of the videos of like how other communities and how businesses are dealing with all of this are on their website. So again, I'll make sure I save a PDF copy of this and provide it to the community. But Resiliency Academy through New Hampshire SBDC has a lot of information. The other one, I just kind of did a search and said, does anybody have a guide like to help communities from start to finish on how to do resiliency planning? Sure. NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, who knew that that was, somebody might have known that that was a branch of the federal government. They've actually put together a community resiliency planning guide that walks you through all the steps if you did want to have a community resiliency plan. And as I said, we're going to develop a community guide, almost like a checklist. Where, what in your master plan? What else should you be thinking about? You know, if you're dealing with community facilities, what sorts of things should you be including in that conversation to be resilient in the face of challenges like this in the future? Right now, if you go to nccouncil.org and then North Country Rising, you'll find the full North Country Rising plan. You'll find the business resource guide, you'll find the videos, you'll find the case studies. It's loaded with information and summary reports from all the different industries. There's a ton of information in there. That's me, that's the logo, that's how you get in touch with me if you need to reach me. I made it, I think, just in time. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm gonna stick around because I'm interested to hear about what's happened with the assessment of current facilities. And do you want to hold any questions till after that, or let people bombard me after that if they need to?
Yeah, we'll see what we have for time.
Perfect.
People stay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So once again, Jen has put time and effort, and some of our committee has put time and effort in with Jen to do an educational document. It's just an overview of the buildings that we have in town, who owns them, how do they work, what land do we have, who owns it, those types of things. There seem to be common questions. We're not gonna necessarily go over the entire document. It's really just taking a quick look at it, knowing that it's there as a resource on our website as well as a copy of the town hall. So we're just asking for some patience. We did the document. We're gonna go over a few examples of what's in it, so we're not gonna go over everything right now, okay?
So actually, that's it. That was pretty much the summary. So I'm relatively new to town, and so some of you may already know all of the facilities we have, and I sincerely applaud you for that. I'm also much more of a visual learner, so I wanted to make sure that there was one place that everyone could go to get a better understanding of what we have collectively as a town for facilities. And so this presentation is really best used through the link on the town website. That way you can fully access the information that's presented. So for example, each page for the facilities features photos of the facility, contact information, direct links to their websites where you can learn more about each individual facility. It tells you what its current use is, and then also, hopefully this will work, this is actually a link to the tax maps. So how many people are familiar with using the tax maps and finding information? Okay, it's okay, most of you, but it's not as easy for everybody. So I'll just do a quick, here's what you're looking for. When you're looking here, this says R14-8, right? So when you're viewing it on a map, which is going to reload, you're looking for, this is the map that you need, and then this number 8 is the lot that you're looking for. And conveniently, the town-owned properties are all shaded in green. So hopefully that will help you as you navigate. There are, trying to think, maybe 25 pages of facilities featuring everything from the library to Gray's Inn Garage, the fire station. I'll note that a lot of these facilities, like the fire station, have spent a lot of time looking at each of their individual buildings and facilities and needs. This documentation does not go into those facility needs, but if you click through to their web pages or their websites, then you'll find more information there about what they've assessed for their needs. Just gonna click through to some other things of note towards the end. We have some joint management facilities, so things like the Whitney Center, the transfer station. We've also included the ambulance service. It is not a Jackson facility, but we felt it was important for everyone to know that it's a shared service. So when we talk about the survey in November, we're talking about the things that we need in our community. This is also something we want you to think about, is maybe this isn't a facility that we have, but it is definitely a service that we use in our community. And then we included the cemeteries, as well as land, so things like Jackson Falls, Profile Rock, which is up off of Tin Mine, and then some really small parcels that don't photograph well. And these are not linked on the map, but if you can use the general tax map on the town's website and look at them. But I did try to describe where they are. We're talking about oftentimes of 0.21 acres in the middle of 4,000 acre lots. So they're very small, unique. It's fun to know about. And then we also have things like the Jackson Community Church. We don't own the building, but it's used in emergency situations. So it's just, again, good to know about. You can find all of this on the town website, which is jackson-nh.org, and then we have the facilities committee page. And then I wanted to take the opportunity to include some other additional resources. There's a really great town FAQ, or quick reference sheet for residents, that will introduce you to different ways you can hear about things that are going on in town. Again, you all may already know about them, but I know that there are lots of people that, you know, aren't getting all of the information in all of the different ways, and so I wanted to make sure it was included here. So, I hope that you take the time to click through this and look at it. I hope it's informative, and I hope it's helpful in our conversation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's the informative session that we wanted to have with all of you. I really appreciate you coming. We'll have a few questions. So this is all information that we wanted to put out to get you starting to think, like, what do we want? And it's not just what facilities do we have that we could fit something in, but what services do you want in your community moving forward? It could be anything, like housing or emergency locations for people who have a fire. You know, I don't even know, like, you know, other things that you have experienced in other places that you're like, this is amazing. Why don't we have this back here in Jackson? And then looking forward, what are we looking at in our future? What do we want our community to look like? So it really is an opportunity for you to put your voice out there and say, what do we want in this community? What are we looking for? So all ideas are welcome in this instance and moving forward. And we would like to have the survey done in November and have everybody that can respond in the community, all of our taxpayers and part-time residents, full-time residents, respond and gather all of that back and have a few listening posts as well as we move forward, and then get this back to the selectmen and by March. So, and we're working together, the school board and the town are working together, so we're trying to get as much of the community involved as we possibly can. So with that, I would like to open up to a few questions. We have some time. So if anybody has any questions for Stacy, Jen, myself, Barbara, or each other? It's been a long time since we have seen some of each other. Miss Emily?
I always have a question.
I know, I appreciate it.
So this is for Stacy, and it was something that, that as I'm watching your presentation, and I'm surrounded by firefighters, thinking about what was the connection with any of the emergency medical service providers, anybody from that sector? Because the shortage of staff is chronic, and I was just thinking, wow, there's a whole group.
Not a lot. I mean, a lot of the conversations we had was related to like healthcare, medical,
That's what I
like
was
the
thinking.
larger facilities. And part of it is that when you're working on your EDA funds, they're like, you're not working with the communities, you're working with business and industry. I'm like, but they're working
If they
for
go
us
on
too.
fire.
Yeah, exactly. We also saw that a lot of the folks I would have liked to have those conversations with, like it was tough to get a hold of folks. It was tough to do that. But I think it's an important piece, especially at the community level, when you're talking about resiliency, when you're talking about community facilities, when you're talking about not just human disasters, natural disasters, these like really preparedness situations. They're your A team. They're the ones that have more information to give to help the community plan in times of future challenges and what is needed and what sort of facilities might be needed as well. I was thinking about that on the way over. So many of our communities, because we're rural, I know we share services and we share facilities, and yet we're so geographically dispersed. I often wonder, like, I said to a friend of mine who's a retired fireman in Littleton, I said, why is it that every single day the alarms are going off in Littleton? Is there like been more fires? What is going on? And he said, we are now responding to Sugar Hill and Franconia as well. So if it's any one of those communities, they're going, and I'm going, wow, so does that mean our fire department's being more spread out? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, oh goodness. Makes me nervous because Littleton is also growing.
Yeah.
You know, what does that mean, and do we need more firefighters? Yeah. Yeah.
All right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to comment. I wanted to. Time is limited. I'm Willis Kelly. Probably a lot of you don't know me, but I'm a sixth-generation Jackson family, and I've given over 50 years of service to all kinds of different things. And the one thing that I know you can't one thing that's missing, and that's your services that the town needs. And the only four I'm gonna talk real quick, police, fire, highway, and school. We have a great police department, 4 full-time and 1 part-time, none live in Jackson. We have a 20-man roster on the fire department, 15 may be active, less than 10 live in Jackson. We have a 4-man highway department, well, none of them live in Jackson. I can't speak for the school exactly, but I've got a guesstimate that probably 80% of the school employees, part-time, full-time aides, do not live in Jackson. That's a huge issue. Going forward, if you look at the population of Jackson over the last 5 years only, we've gone up. In the last 2 years, it's hovered a little above and a little below 900. You go back 5 years, our community has grown, our housing has gone crazy with big homes, lots of families that come in, our tourist population, our services are going down, and it's harder and harder and harder to get people, especially when it's not full-time like fire and EMS. And volunteers, and please, this is not a negative comment, but a lion's share of our community, residents, do not give in time. They support, we have wonderful support of all our departments, and thank everyone for that. But it's more than that. And that, to me, should be in any discussions about the backbone and the strength of the community and facility. And I hope our facilities committee will take that into heed. And the other thing to end that, if there's some immediate needs that you're focusing on, as well as long-term needs, March is too late to talk about that. Budget season's starting to be summer. Just want to remind people of that.
This is nothing to do with the budget.
It's nothing to do with the budget, but if you bring a report into the selectmen and you say, we found these 2 things that you need to talk about fast, it's too late in March, that's all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Question? General comment?
Hi, I'm putting on my mental health hat, I get it later. And mental health didn't come up in a specific way. I know that it may be included, but especially during the pandemic, I think that we saw, and our North Country has seen a couple waves from my perspective of mental health crises through the opioid epidemic, which really has just transitioned to straight fentanyl. If anybody hadn't heard, I know. But mental health hasn't come up specifically, and I wonder if that's.
It's throughout the plan as specific strategies. We talked to Casey, I'm gonna forget her last name, it's like Afertiti. She works for mental health for like the northern part of the state. And we talked quite a bit about how do we, in fact, it's in the cultural piece as well as in the backbone facilities for mental health. How do we create a culture that it's okay to talk about mental health all of the time, that it's not just this one-time thing, that mental health is clearly an important piece. It is throughout the planning process, even though the presentation today was sort of general, 30,000-foot view. Trust me, we definitely heard that. But thank you for saying it again, because I think it's something that we need to continue to talk about.
Yeah,
It is that important.
It comes up too when we talk about, a healthcare crisis and the way that when people have to leave because of sickness or their children are sick, but then mental health, I think almost, and for a lot of people, has matched that their sick days are due to mental health. And so how do we support that side of things in our communities as well? And it ends up being on the backbone of a lot of our first responders too, without additional services where it's talked about specifically.
We heard that. We heard a specific example of, if you had the flu, if you had the fever, if you had COVID, it's fine to call out and say that you're sick. But if you you need a mental health day, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and get in. That's not an excuse. But why? Why isn't it? Because we're creating all these additional issues that are happening because we're not valuing mental health the way we do the physical health things that we have in the past. So I hear you on that. Thank you for bringing that up. It's very important.
All right, just one more, 2 more. Peter?
Hi, Peter Benson. Emily asked the questions, I make the comments. I would encourage us all, I've heard, this is a good conversation, I've heard a lot tonight about wants, but I would encourage us to think about this in a two-part way, and needs and wants are 2 different things. This community needs, in your perception, is different than what it wants. I I always want a hot fudge sundae for dinner, but what I really need is a salad. So I would encourage you, when the survey comes, to really think long and hard about what this community needs as a community to move forward versus what we want. Not saying we can't get some of the wants, but we really need to prioritize what the needs might be. Because if we don't, in terms of human resources and facilities, there won't be much of a community left in a dozen years or so. Thanks.
Good point. Anybody else? No? All right, one last wave to the camera.
Just one
Yeah.
other thing,
Nice.
I have one more question.
Yeah, no, not at all. Did you, yes?
Well, just
Sure.
just a question. Stacy presented a vision and sort of a framework that was very, very broad and comprehensive and really focused around resilience. And your committee is a facilities committee, which is, you know, a much narrower subset of that. Is that going to be the focus of what your group does? Or are you going to incorporate more of these concepts of, you know, resilience and services and some of the other things that we've heard about tonight?
Yes, our goal is in the survey is to ask community members what services do we feel we need to sustain ourselves. You know, we are looking at what buildings we already own, but it's really what do we need as a community, and that doesn't necessarily mean a facility at this point in time. It could come back that we need other services, we need housing for firemen. I don't know at this point, like what we're gonna come back with from the community at large to say what are, and then we can say, do we have a facility that can be can work? Do we have land that we need a facility? But really, it's a fishing expedition to see what we need as a community and what are people thinking that we need as a community to move forward and to stay however we want to stay. This or transition to something else, I don't know. So it's really open-ended, and I don't want to pigeonhole or put ideas out there. I really want to get what people are thinking. So.
And one of the things I just want to say to bring this in, Jen, do you want to?
Okay.
Oh, sorry. But Jen and I are here together because back in March, we wanted to build a new fire station, and we also wanted to put seven-figure infrastructure investment for the school, and we weren't talking to each other as much. So now community is the biggest word today. Community is why we're all sitting here. We want to maintain Jackson's community and integrity, and we want all the new folks that are here, as well as the people that have grown up and lived here and were born here, to maintain that community. We're all here because we love Jackson. It's not because we want to come in here and change it and make it a different town than it has been for all of these years. So bringing all of us together, because we're all paying the same tax dollars. Some of it goes to the school district, some of it goes to the town and the community, but we're all paying towards the same thing. Do we need both a fire station or an ambulance facility and a school and all that? That's what we want all of you to keep in mind. And you're right, Peter. It's not about wants and needs. It's about all of that and how you maintain the integrity of Jackson. So we're really excited to hear all of the input that people have. We're also excited to hear that you know where to find this information, because like you know, one of the things that really makes me upset is when people say, I don't know where to find that and I don't know how to access it or who to talk to. So please, any of us that you can reach from the committee or the select board or Julie's in the office, don't go without asking if you can't find something. We will be happy to provide it, educate you, and hopefully this survey will also lead you to the right places to find information. So be educated in the community that we all really strive to love. And thank you.
I was just gonna sort of comment on your line of inquiry and sort of the rationale for tonight, and it dovetails nicely with what you were saying, is that what we found is when we were talking about facilities and we were talking about what our mission was and what our purpose was with the committee, was that we realized that we really needed to make sure that everybody was talking about it in the same way and had a better base understanding of what we had. And so tonight was really to bring Stacy in to talk about what resiliency is and what other communities might be doing as this sort of a way of sort of having a collective idea about what the future needs are and what our different types of capital are in the community, and then just trying to get everybody to have a better understanding of what we have for facilities, and then sort of set us up for success in handing you a survey, right? That way, we felt it was not really a best foot forward to survey everyone without providing an opportunity to make sure that we were spreading the word about what we currently have in our community. And so this was just sort of like, hey, we've been doing this work, we're excited about it, we want you guys to be thinking about it and learning more about it, and then setting you up for the survey that's coming in November. And we're hoping to generate that, get it out in a variety of different ways, and then turn the data over quickly so that we do have something so that it can be used in a variety of ways by the town to move us further in the conversation towards having the facilities that we need.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Sue.
Just a quick comment. I think all of this was great, and resiliency is grand, and it's important, especially for the North Country. And what we discussed is the difficulty we had with staff, the difficulty that we had with, I mean, we're all Jackson's a lot of business people, and we're all dealing with that. We're talking about big numbers, and what we want to do in March with big numbers. But if you come right down to brass tacks, one of the most embarrassing things is driving into Jackson and watching somebody try to line a soccer field with the grass that deep. They're just, I mean, to me, it's part of what Will's brought up, it's part of what others brought up. We gotta get that together. We're talking about big numbers and big excitement and grand things. And we're not even getting our sports fields mowed and our green area in Jackson. Trying to build something in Jackson and have them not bring up green. I mean, everybody wants green, but then we have green and they're not taking care of it. So it goes to the volunteers like us, and it goes to the backbone and the staffing, but I think it's for best foot forward, and we're not doing that right now with our grounds that we own. So before we talk about multi-million-dollar buildings, I would love to think that we could get our fields mowed and our gardens tended and our buildings looking nice that we have.
Good point.
That's our kids
I'm
playing
sorry,
sports.
I would love it if you would either come to a selectmen's meeting or call me during the week or set something up with me to talk about that, and we can talk with either the highway department who handles all of our grounds and stuff specifically.
But I mean, they're gonna be in the same boat, it's just, I think it all goes together. I think, it's.
No, excellent point, but you two should connect.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming, presenting treats, take some. Please be on the lookout for the survey.
I was trying to do this show. You're okay. There's always people who they let you do that. They don't let you come in and